So when you hear about information architect, I'm sure people here in the room must have heard the term information architect, and I'm not bringing any new concept to you. But like Pallavi mentioned, that how is information architect different from technical writer? Or is it part of technical documentation team? In case some of you don't know, we will explore that. So in this session, we will explore what is an information architect, who is the information architect, how it came into origin, why we need it not only in the documentation team, but in the organization also. What is the difference between a technical writer and an IA? Let's call from here onwards information architect as IA. So that's another thing that you will need to see, that what is the difference between technical writer and information architect? Is there actually any difference? That we will explore. In case if there is, then what are the ways where which you can implement, which you can upskill, use to upskill and become an information architect, in case this session appears interesting to you and in case your goal is also to become an information architect in the future. So let's get started with what is information architect, and I hope all of you are seeing my screen. So the first screen is more for you to read here. This term came into existence in 1976. There was a person called Richard Saul Bowman. He coined this term. The work he was doing, he thought at that point of time, 1976, and this is 2020, how many years it is? 44 years. My God, that's like a lifetime. Yeah. So he thought that the explosion of data needed an architecture, a series of systems, systemic design, and a series of performance criteria to measure it. So you see the term series, systemic, just remember those terms. We will be using those terms later. So basically what he thought, where he was working, he thought there is a lot of data coming in. Now that kind of data, we need to organize and have some better way to represent it. That's all he thought. And he came up with the term. So he's called the father of information architect, if you can call like that. Then as the information architect concept basically got popular across the globe, we have one institute which is very popular. This institute is named as the Information Architecture Institute, where I will be sharing the links in the end of the session so you can explore their website. This institute defines information architecture as the art and science of organizing and labeling websites. Remember, websites, intranets, online communities, and software to support usability. So here you see the importance of websites and why it will play a key role. We will see soon in the next few slides. But in general term, now let's come back to 2020, where we are and who we are. We are from documentation team or tech writing group. So for a tech writing group, what is an information? Who is an information architect? What is information architecture? So information architect, simplest way I could find to define. If you have some additional points to add, please do mention, but simplest way is design the technical documentation content in a hierarchy that suits the customer requirement. So technically the person is supposed to design the content. Remember, design, not write the content. So this is what generally an information architect is, and information architect, basically the output is called information architecture. Now, before coming to information architecture, I'm sure many of you will know what is information architecture. More than information architecture, if you are in IT, you must have heard about another kind of architecture, and that architecture is called as software architecture. So the question is, why do we need those? So software architecture, now as you are aware, what is it used for? Can anybody in the room answer what is software architecture and why do we need it? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, the components of the software application, how they interact with each other. so that how the data are transferred from one part to another, like how the transaction are done through that software. For
Right.
example, say IRCT is there, so there is a database, there are APIs, and there is a client client software is there, irct.com. So how
Right.
this interaction happen? Yeah.
Thanks, Ravi. So anybody else can answer, what is this software architecture used for?
Hi, Punit, this is Sumit here. So it's
Yep.
all about defining the software protocol of how you will go about designing the software architecture in the longer run, be it the business flows or the data flows. So it gives you an entire flow of how a software operates in the long
Yeah,
run.
exactly. Thank you so much. So as we see in the case of software architecture, remove the term software architecture. Basically, it's giving you a platform. It's giving you a design like all explained right now. And based on that, something is built, the software is built, the flows and all, everything is built on that. So just imagine if that architecture is not there, then how chaotic a software will be, or probably whether there will be a software without an architecture. So that's the thing we should think. And now let's come back to information architecture, not architect, information architecture. When we are documenting even in 2020 in our respective organizations, I'm not sure how many of you actually think you have an information architecture in your organization followed. Anybody here in the room who thinks they have a proper information architecture defined? Anybody in the room? Okay, so probably the answer is no. So that means what are we doing? We are basically documenting, and we always document for the end users. We always document considering what the product is. So basically we are providing the output, remember, but as we spoke about software architecture, we are not aware about the architecture. And as a result, probably we are not aware about this important role, which has come into this plays a very key role nowadays, the role of information architect. So let's see then, that sets up the ground for why does a documentation team need an IA? Now I think after that quietness about how many of you know that your team has information architecture, we don't need this slide, but still, let's see. First, let's go back to some history. Earlier, what was the ideal documentation team? Earlier and probably now also, what is the ideal documentation team? Generally, we have writers, then we have reviewers or editors, and we have manager, and probably some more here and there. But primarily, these were the rules, and these were the things we were having before, right now also. Uh, Maybe some addition and writers. When I say, of course, the writers are of different level, maybe the staff, junior, senior, different kind of writers. But ultimately, what does this team do? They basically work for a model, and what is that model that you work for? There is a project, and on that project, uh, basically you provide some kind of output, some documentation. So that is called the project goal, the documentation project goal. That's the simple thing overall in documentation we work for. But if we go ahead and just see that what was the writer doing, because why I am defining, you will be knowing, but since we want to define how information architect is different from the roles that we are having, so that is why I'm giving you just some definition. So technically, what does a writer do? Basically, we can say writer writes about some specific feature or product, maybe not whole product, but some feature. Then we have reviewers who review the technical accuracy. Then we have editors who basically ensure the organizational documentation standards. And then we have managers who are technically supposed to plan for the content delivery, overall content delivery in a project. And apart from that, they do manage resources also. All these together, what do they do? The overall team goal is follow the instructions of engineering or product management, or else in some cases directly management also, and just provide the documentation output. That's what overall we do. Now, earlier, the world of products was very simple. We used to have one big product. The customers just needed some guides. And what did they do with the guide? They actually studied the guide. They used to print that huge guides and then read that guide like a student. And then they used the product. The documentation team prepared one guide or multiple guides. In the guide, they had a defined TOC, probably for that one product or multiple product. In short, we can say life was simple and easily managed by the documentation team. The guides that we used to prepare, even we do right now also, it used to have chapters, multiple chapters, and everybody expected the users to patiently read the instructions, right? Because the users had no other option but to read the instruction. They could not Google it that time, probably the time I am talking about. But slowly, the world changed for better. Now the technology is basically improvised. Everything got changed. But with that, what happened? Products turned bigger. There was no simple product. There were products turned complex. Chapter by chapter study of document was no more liked. As expected, it was left for kids to study their books. Customers don't have patience anymore. They want information at their fingertip in a very short time for whatever they want to do. And in that evolution, technical communication department was not spared. It changed too. We heard about new processes. We heard about structured documentation. We heard about how important reusing the content is. We saw earlier, if any earlier, when I say in many of you who have experience of more than 5 years or so, you will realize how important PDF output was before. Now in 2020, do you think it holds the same importance? Now, when we talk about doc content, we generally refer to HTML unless there is a very specific case of clients who want PDF. But generally nowadays, documentation means documentation website. And then when we evolved, we thought about ways now how to bring in new guides where we can provide quick and easy information. And the best part which happened with this evolution was content actually became the king. There was no more the same song from the product teams or the management that documentation is not important. I mean, of course, still you can hear this, but then the percentage reduced. Now with the product, everybody felt that documentation is important. Documentation should be complete. That's why in Agile, mostly, although there is a lot of rush, there is a lot of pressure for documentation team, but in the end, the best part is people want document to go live with the product. Why do they want it? Because they know it's important. Inside organization, they might be telling you, oh, documentation team, like one of you mentioned, they don't give value. They might be, saying it. Although that ratio is also decreasing very much. But then in the end, documentation gained that important. All that happened. So content was no more expected to be just a group of words, sentences, topics, and chapters that we used to have earlier in guides. And trust me, those guides, those who have I'm sure most of you know, but those who don't know, those guides were like competing with each other. At one point of time in my career, I was working in an organization. It has one installation guide, it has one implementation guide, it has one administration guide. On top of that, it has one solution guide. These are the four main guides I'm telling you. There were multiple other guides. Okay, all were available in HTML and PDF. And these four guides that I told you, they were competing with each other that who can have more number of pages. Admin and implementation guide, can you believe it, was running into thousands. And when the solution guide came, we proposed, now since we have solution guide, which talks about the overall product, let's remove this admin guide and implementation guide. Let's bring everything to one guide, solution guide, because reusability was becoming a problem. Management said, no, we will have this guide also. And in the end, the solution guide reached 1500 pages. So there were guides and guides. Who was doing the planning? Was anyone from the doc team planning for the content? Why? Which content should go where? Which guide we should have? And I'm sure in all this process, when I'm talking about guides and all, very few in the past used to think about documentation website. Most of the people used to think about their guide. Trust me, like I have some good experience of almost 20 years in different companies. I'm not talking about an era of 2015 or before, but in very few companies, that too off late, I hear the importance of documentation website. Here the importance means talking about how to plan your content that can go on the documentation website. Earlier, the whole thing was which tool we should use, which can provide us a good guide. We always used to think about guide. Any of you here in the room who think that they have worked in a scenario where people used to talk about documentation website rather than documentation guides? Please feel free to join.
Yeah, Punit, so with this side, actually, we have actually moved beyond the traditional ways of delivering our documentation. When you talk about specific guides catering to specific functionalities, but yes, now with the IA roles being in the picture, we have moved beyond the traditional ways of delivering our content to the customers. So we, in our organizations, have given it a thought to actually move our content from specific websites to a documentation websites. So we are actually working in that direction.
Awesome. So you have an information architect or?
Yes.
There?
So,
okay.
So we are in plans of involving an information architect to structure all our documentation knowledge rather than segregating it into specific guides or one guide that will handle all the functionalities. So there has been discussions of hiring an IA in the longer term to manage.
Yes. Exactly. Thanks, Sumit. Anybody else who has heard about documentation website being more priority than the documentation guide?
Yes, Punit, doc team will be producing a lot of deliverables which will be very useful for the customers. So I think we cannot embed everything into a guide. So I think we should have a centralized repository like website where a user can get the information that he needs.
Yes, right. Thanks, Yuvraj. Anybody else here? Guys, feel free to talk. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tanushree. So for us, it was because I am the sole technical writer in my entire org. So it began with the guy when I came in approximately for a year. They didn't have anybody as a technical writer. So we don't have. I am working also as someone who will work as an IA too. So they came to me as we want to have a guide and all of that. But the funny part is. Pushing the document first in the form of whatever, whether it's available online or offline, came in. I mean, because it began with let's begin with the guide. It'll help us a lot. But then reality sort of stuck in, and they came in before the guide, at least the document should be out first. So I think that way it sort of got emphasized for
Okay,
us.
that's great. Yeah, being a single writer has its own challenges. It has its own benefit also, but I think challenges are more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Cool. So, okay. Anybody else wants to share? Otherwise, I'll move ahead. Okay. So with all these challenges about guides, there was a lot of information, but as you see in the definition provided right at the first slide, there was a lot of information, but then how this information can be structured, how this information can be reused rather than saying the same thing in different kind of guides. The evolution part which we are talking about, the world changed for better. When the world changed for better, one thing became very prominent, and that was websites, that was internet, intranet, documentation website, everything came into fore. And there only came the new discipline in technical documentation team. And this new discipline was named basically as information architect, because like Sumit mentioned and others mentioned, now people realize that the big challenge is not about writing the guide. Even if you write the best of the guides, but if it's not planned properly, if it's not arranged properly, if it's not presented properly, then it probably doesn't solve the purpose. All that hard work of the big team of writers, or even the single writer, it goes waste if tomorrow the customer comes back and says, I am unable to find the information. Then your support team will pick the call. Okay, go to this page, go to this guide on this page number. So actually that content is already there, but it's lost somewhere in the crowd. And one key role of documentation team is to reduce the support call. Now, if customers will have to call support to get the documentation link, then that purpose is not solved, despite we providing our best foot forward, taking best foot forward and creating the guides. So to sort all this, people realized that yes, we do have a lot of content. This all doesn't mean that technical writers were doing a bad job. Please remember that technical writers were doing a good job. They were getting the best guides and all, everything. It was just that how this information will be structured, how we can have a documentation website which can have a look and feel and a search system which is based on users' taste bud. Then came this information architect, where primarily when we talk about IA, the IA is responsible to prepare the company blueprint, like what we call the architecture. It is the IA will be preparing a company blueprint to present technical information to the customers, primarily on a website. We are not talking about PDFs. We are not talking about the TOC of a user guide here. We are talking about overall content, how to present it. And based on that framework or based on that blueprint, basically the writers in the team will go ahead and build the content or write the content. So that is why a documentation team needs an IA, because IA is the person who will sell your content, who will make you feel more important, that okay, these guys are doing a great job. So that's all we need about why IA is important. Hope that's clear. Now let's come to the question. Okay, fine, IA, but is this IA different from what we technical writers are? Anybody can take a guess. If I have to say that looking at this cute guy, the kid, could this be a writer or an IA? Any guess? Nobody
I
wants to
think
take a.
he's a writer because he's very cute.
Right.
And they're very cute.
Oh,
He
writers are.
can be he can be both. He can be actually designing the structure on paper first, and or he could be a writer who's actually doing the pen work.
Right. Okay. So let's take this that since he or she probably has a pencil or something in hand and writing, so that's a writer. And I will minus that cute comment, because if somebody is there who is a friend of IA here in the room, they will feel offended, because IAs are also humans. They can be also cute, right? Now, who could be
Sorry
this?
for that. That was just a joke.
Yeah, I am also just joking. Don't take it. Okay, who could be this? Can this be a writer? Yes, writers also think, but when we talk in this context, okay. So in general, IAs are supposed to think, plan, and overall design an architecture. So these, I mean, of course, these figures can be, these images you can define in the way you want, but generally that's the idea that, okay, before getting into the slide, that what is the difference between technical writer and IA? Let's see. So what makes an IA different from TW? Some general things. So when we talk about activity, generally technical writer is supposed to write. IA is supposed to plan. When we talk about output, our technical writer's output is documents. IA's is a blueprint or an architecture. Areas where we cover, we technical writers generally interact with which fields, generally the project teams or the product teams. Basically, we are interacting. Yes, we do interact with other parts of the organization also, but primary interaction is limited to project teams or the product management or owner. IA's field is complete organization, not just the project team. Because IA plans the content presentation, keeping organization in mind, keeping the current customers and the future customers of the organization in mind, not just about some features. An organization can have multiple products also. So IA has to think about a broader picture. The focus when we talk about technical writers also think about users, IAs think about customers. This is a tough one for me. Can anybody explain what is the difference between users and customers? Anybody wants to volunteer? Take a guess. There is no points, negative points.
I feel when you say users, your POV, I mean, your point of view over here is how would you, so, I mean, your business is not the first thing which comes in your mind. The first thing comes in your mind is how easy the product is to use or how to make things easy. But when you say use the term customers, according to me, the another angle called as business model sort of comes in. I mean,
Awesome. You nailed it. This is awesome. Anybody has anything additional to add? That was more than perfect answer that I was looking for. Thank you. Anybody else has other view?
Users can be internal users as well who are using the application from a functionality perspective, and customers are more of adding business value proposition. The customers could be internal as well who are actually improving the usability of the product. Customers, when you talk about them, they are from a business value perspective.
Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else was also, somebody else was there? Yeah. Who wanted to speak?
The customers will maintain the product. Users will use the product that we have,
Right. All are right. The first one is the best. So the business proposition and the product proposition. Okay. So this is where, when you see the points under IA, area, organization, IA is thinking about the organization, and that's why all this. So input part, I think itself, from where the input comes, it's self-explanatory. Since writers are more or less interacting with project team, so input is primarily coming from project teams, and IA is interacting with the organization, and IA has to think about customers. IA has to interact with the senior management also, and the customers also. So I hope this is clear, and let's move to that now how do I want to become an IA? I hope by this time it's a bit clear that technical writers are a bit different. I won't say 100% different, but a bit different from IA's role. Now to become an IA, you don't need to, ride a special horse, or you need to have some kind of a special mask. Simple thing. 3 key skills you need. UX. UX is equal to user experience. The IA must understand the user experience, or what you say, the customer experience, okay, better. Generally, that is what this IA is there in the organization for. Like Sumit was explaining right now about that his organization is trying to bring in an IA. This is what the IA will first do. The IA will explore about the current customer experience, the current expectation, get the feedback, and based on that, the IA will plan that, okay, how content can play a better role. So they will have to get into the shoes of the customers. They will have to think, how does the user or how does the customer actually think? How to present complex product in easy to understand mode. And when I'm saying present, it doesn't mean writing just a guide, but overall content presentation. Now, how will the IA do that? To do that, 2 main things they need. They must be a design thinker. A design thinker is somebody, first of all, who is able to understand the problems of the customer in a very proper way. And then not only understand the problem, but also thinks about a solution. So this is where a design thinker comes, and you must have heard about the field called design thinking. So wherever thinking is involved, design thinking is there. And then based on all that, user experience is there, problems have been understood, a solution has been there. How will you implement it? To implement that, you need to have a good content strategist. You have to plan content as per the logical flow. There should be some hierarchy, which is called generally taxonomy. You should think about content which is consumable. There should be a strategy for that. All content is not consumable. And we always think about the customers or the users getting lost, the right content they are not finding. Probably the right content is not presented in the way the users actually want. The writers or the team may think we have written in the best possible way, but probably the user is thinking about in a different mode. So this is where this sync, this IA has to establish, and this is where these are the 3 key skills: UX, design thinking, content strategy. These are 3 big things actually, but in the next slide we will see it's actually not a big thing. If we talk about, can tech writers transition to be an IA? So think about yourself right now. When you guys were interacting, somebody said that I am a lone writer. Somebody said we have been having experiences. So think about this. Whatever you see as a good experienced technical writer, haven't you guys been doing this, all this? Understanding product, analyzing users, content, structure content. Data is full of structured content. Even if you're not using data, then also we talk about a structured content. You don't go and just place your content in a guide haphazardly. You have a plan in mind. You have a structure in mind. You have been presenting content in terms of different guides. You don't put the content of installation guide in a, user guide. You don't put the content of how to use a product in an installation guide, do you? No, you don't. So you actually present content already. You know what to do. You understand about the type of outputs that we are having. In today's world, there is textual output, then a format, then we have audios, then we have visuals, then the formats we have HTML, PDF, and multiple other formats. So as an experienced writer, maybe as a fresher, you might not have done it, but as an experienced writer with 4 to 5 years of experience, you might have already done all this. I'm sure most of you will agree. Now, one step more, and you can turn into a good IA. We saw this slide, right? UX, design thinking, content strategy. These are the big things. So mix your skills with those things. Think about how to prepare a blueprint. Don't just work on authoring tools. You could be a master of Madcap Flair. You could be a master of FrameMaker. That is very good. But think about the bigger picture. Understand the authoring tools, because to present the content, you will also have to think which authoring tool suits our requirement better. Which type of authoring tools? Do we need single sourcing tools? Do we need CMS? Do we need something else? We have so many tools. So that understanding should be there, not just the understanding of one tool which you're working on. You should have that great communication skill which goes beyond your development and project management teams. To identify bigger problems and provide solutions. That's what we talked about in design thinking. And of course, you should be a good planner. If you have all that, then I think you are up to that stage. You know what all you can do if you want to be an IA. To be an IA, just remember one thing. It's not necessary that you should be a technical writer, then only you can be an IA. You can be an IA if you have that knack of planning, thinking, content strategy, making a strategy. You can be an IA right from the start of your career. But then, like you see in this slide, where to find resources. On top, you will see the external links where you can go and study. But see the recommendation part, recommendation to upskill. Learn design thinking, content strategy, fair enough. But remember the last point, the most important point, basics of technical writing. You're going to be an information architect of a technical documentation team. So for that, the first thing we should know is basics of technical writing. Once you have done that, grow yourself with other skills, and I'm sure you can be an IA. So I think that's all I had. Yes. Anybody has questions or anything? Any observations? Not exactly questions only.
Just a quick question. Will this? So I see this call being recorded. So will this recording be available?
Yes, it will be.
All right.
So I have a question, Punit. So what
Yep.
are the deliverables of IA apart from documentation? Like we create this, like, for example, like our company has a documentation website, but other than that, is that company website can also be a delivery of IA?
That's a very good question. Anybody in the room, based on the presentation, will like to take that question? Otherwise, I'm there to answer. Anybody wants to help?
I think any aspect where we think as a technical writer user will, get out of the topic and unable to get the information that he need, then IA comes into picture.
Yep. And the planning part. So when you talk
Yes.
about website, which content will go where? Okay. How the content will be designed? What kind of information do you need there? What kind of, if you're thinking in terms of guides, should there be content repeated? Or for better navigation, that content should be reused? What will be the SEO playing the role? The search factor, how important the search will be, because these days, even we ourselves go to some website, and if the search is not working, think about your and mine patience capacity. Within seconds, forget about a minute, within 2 to 3 seconds, if we are not getting the search proper, we are out of that site, isn't it? Unless our life depends on that site. So this is where. So overall, it's the planning part, giving us the structure. On that structure, only the writers are supposed to build the content. So the basic differentiation, if we have to make, the IA, forget about what he does, planning and all, his or her output is providing a structure. That is what is called a blueprint or an architecture, providing an architecture. And based on that, the writers will build the content. Is that clear? Okay, I can't hear. Any other question?
So I mean, like, how often IA will be part of this documentation deliverables that we provide? Like,
Right from beginning, Yuvraj. Right from beginning, all the time. Like even for documentation, when we talk about DDLC, is our work over when the project is delivered? No, right?
No.
We
Yeah.
keep on doing the maintenance work, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the IA's work is also to keep on evolving, to keep thinking more and more how better it can get.
Yes. I think customers' feedback also will play a key role for the IA, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I think we don't have any more questions for the last time. No questions?
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the difference between an UX designer and an IA?
UX designer. So when we talk about UX designer is primarily limited to the UI, the product.
Okay.
Right? That the UX designer designs the UI of the product. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
but you
here
were speaking about the content strategy, right? So how this IA and UX designer communicate? Is there any communication between them? How they plan the strategy and how they build the website?
Yeah, so but UX designer will not build your make your documentation website, right? UX designer will not plan what kind of documentation hierarchy should be there on your documentation site. UX designer will only think about the overall presentation on the product UI within an IT organization.
Sorry to interrupt here.
Yes.
Punit, I think Farheen wants to join and she's been trying very desperately and somehow I'm not able to make her join. If she's here, or please make her join in this.
No, I